Jesus taught in parables. And many of those parables have become stories that we know well outside the Bible too. They become very familiar stories because not only do they resonate with people, we do have a little bit of a tendency to take parables sometimes at kind of face value and say, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like the parable of the mustard seed, which is essentially tiny seed grows into big thing. The kingdom of God is like that, Jesus says. Tiny thing grows into a big seed. Okay, but parables, much like people, have layers. Like an onion, or cake, or a parfait, or indeed ogres, as we heard earlier. Parables have layers. And the thing about parables is that the layers are the most important part. The kernel isn't tiny seed turns into big tree. The kernel is really wonder. It's our sense of wonder at what really is in that parable. What's that story about? What's it say? And quite often we can wonder at length because wonder is the point, not the answer. So and you've probably heard people talk about the parable of the mustard seed a bazillion times. You might have even been to a Bible study where they dissected it thoroughly, because there are issues with this story. Because it's not a story about tiny seed grows into big thing. If it were, Jesus would have said, it's like a tiny seed that grows into a big thing. But he didn't. He said it's like a mustard seed, which is the tiniest of all the seeds. It isn't, though. It isn't the tiniest seed. And by the way, it does not grow into a big bush or tree. Again, depends on the translation you're following too, by the way, a little bit. But it doesn't. It grows into like this gross weed thing that's, it's tall-ish, but it's certainly not a bush. And birds don't nest in it or shelter in the shade of its great branches. It's a weed, in fact. It's a very invasive weed. Its roots go everywhere. It's hard to get rid of, so you want to get rid of it right away. So why would Jesus say mustard seed? Why would he give this description? Why would he use that as an example and then not actually be particularly truthful about it? People might have had questions. But we don't hear that in the story, do we? We just hear about how Jesus taught in parables, and then he explained everything to the disciples afterwards. That kind of sounds like there was one version for the people, and then there was kind of like secret information for the disciples afterwards. Again, questions. Because I don't think that's the case. I think he talked about it more thoroughly with the disciples afterwards, much like you might go to a Bible study to talk about this a little bit more fully. But the point was, in telling people the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed, people would have had questions. I don't think Jesus just made a little speech and walked away. I think he said this, and then people probably went, hang on. I was just pulling mustard weeds out of my place the other day. Are you saying the kingdom of God is like a weed? And Jesus would probably say, yep. Wait a minute. A weed? Yeah. Somebody said to me yesterday, actually, just sidebar, difference between a weed and a flower is the judgment. Shout out, Grant. That's very true in terms of how you just look at it, but in terms of also what it might do, again, depends on your perspective. And these days, by the way, we'd have more questions because some people put what we call weeds in their salad or make wine or do other things with these so-called weeds, and yet we are still calling them weeds. So there would have been questions. A weed? Really? Yeah. But then there would have been somebody else probably in that crowd who went, hang on, what do you mean weed? I grow mustard. It's a spice. We put it in things, and we use it as a coloring dye. I grow it on purpose. So Jesus would then probably have said, yeah, great. So which is it, Jesus? Is it a weed that's invasive, or is it something you plant on purpose? And Jesus, I imagine, would have said, yes. Which likely would have left people scratching their heads for a while until they probably, hopefully, eventually started to wonder about how it is with Jesus that he's always saying and instead of or. Because that's what God's garden is like. There is room for all those things. But there's more. Because I imagine sooner or later, somebody would have said, how does it grow? You just said it's like the tiniest seed and it grows into this big. How does it do that? Were you not listening? I just told you. That first bit, that first story about how the farmer goes out, like he plants a seed, he goes out and it grows, he doesn't know how, but it grows, and then he harvests it. Were you not listening? But hang on, Jesus. Are you saying like we have to plant the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of God is planted for us? Yes. Well, hang on. So, look, the guy goes, okay, farmer plants this, and like, but we can explain that. We can explain that because, like, I was in elementary school, and with the cup, and you put the paper towel in, and then you put the little beans around it, and then you make sure the paper towel's wet, and then you can see how the roots grow down and the green part grows up because we watered it and we put it in the sun. It's pretty straightforward, Jesus. Is it, though? Sure, you can explain that. There's science. Absolutely. You can explain that now in great detail. Don't you still wonder how amazing that is? Don't you still wonder how amazing it is that when the roots grow down and the green part grows up, the roots are all different. The leaves are different shades of green. They're different shapes. They're different sizes. Sure, they all look like they're the same beans, but they grow different. They have subtle distinctions in them. Kind of like people, right? We're all human beings, but we're also all uniquely who we are. Don't you ever wonder about that? Don't you ever wonder how awesome and amazing that is? This is a great thing. This great thing about the word wonder is that it's not just about wondering about things. It's about our sense of wonder. How amazing is that? I think that's the thing about parables too, right? Is that you need to dig deeper and deeper and deeper to see really what they're all about. And ultimately, we're going to come to that point where we go, man, I got a lot of questions about this. I need to do a lot of thinking about this. And that's the point at Jesus, where Jesus would probably kind of smile and go, yeah, you do. It's not just for me to tell you. how it is. It's for you to wonder about it and to think about it and get to know it for you and what it says to you and how it speaks to you and how it inspires you and how it causes you to wonder. That's the great thing about it. Hang on a second. I have one more question, Jesus. You started these parables by saying, the kingdom of God is like. But then when we started talking about it, it kind of seemed like we were talking about what it means to us and how we wonder and what we're about and who we are. But isn't the kingdom of God something that's coming to us? Isn't it something that's nearby that's going to happen for us? No, Jesus would say. It's in you. It's not just around you, it's in you too. That's why when I say the kingdom of God is like, I'm not just talking about something out there that you're waiting to have happen. I'm talking about something that's in here that you are a part of. The kingdom of God doesn't happen to you. It happens with you. It happens in you. It happens because you are part of living it into the world. With your wonder, with your stories, offering grace enough to others to hear their story. Offering an openness to others that offers them space to share their story. Not just so that they will feel valued too, but so you will as well. Because of what you will learn from that story, how you will grow within that story. This has been the thread of weeks of stories now. This is the thread of what the Spirit is about. This is the thread from Pentecost and Trinity Sunday and all of these stories. It's the thread that connects us with Pride Sunday and next week, Indigenous Day of Prayer, with this month for Pride and Indigenous history, with our need to hear the stories that aren't just celebration, but are protest. The stories that aren't just about the good things, but about the grieving and the hurt and the brokenness too. That's how the kingdom of God comes here. It's how we draw it nearer so that it may be here. That's what brings the love of the kingdom of God into the world. And that starts with sometimes just a little seed that needs nurture. It needs watering. It needs sunlight. It needs encouragement to grow. That's our job. That's our part in this as co-creators. We are the hands and feet, as Teresa of Avila once said. We are the hands and feet that make it happen, that bring it into the world, so that the kingdom of God might not just be near, but here.